Uncertainty and concern in the wake of big changes for the U.S. military. CNN has learned senior military leaders are worried about what's to come after President Trump forced out Defense Secretary James Mattis next week. The order to pull troops out of Syria is signed, while plans to get about half of the U.S. military stationed in Afghanistan out of that country are being worked on. According to the Wall Street Journal, one Marine commander told a group he was speaking to, quote, "I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen." Sobering words. Joining me now, CNN national security analyst James Clapper, of course, the former director of national intelligence and a retired lieutenant general with the U.S. Air Force. Director Clapper, always good to have you have you join us as you look at what's happened, even just since the last time you spoke on this topic. Mattis being forced out now as of January 1. What does that do? What is your main concern there in terms of a transition?
Well, just exactly that. I mean, Jim, in his very thoughtful resignation letter, had thought about that and was trying to be least disruptive under the circumstances as possible. So now that his distinguished time as Secretary of Defense, and which was a retirement, according to the president, now is turned into a firing, and that's not surprising that the president would do that after realizing that the letter was actually a pretty scathing indictment, and seeing the reaction to it, that he would want to try to take charge and fire him as opposed to letting him retire, air quotes. So the big thing is just the disruption.
The disruption. As we reported, CNN's own reporting, senior military leaders very concerned. They're worried about what comes next because so much is unknown at this point. There's also the reality of how a troop withdrawal works. And the fact that the concern here is that perhaps the president doesn't fully understand how complicated this is. And while there may be a number of Americans who support the move to pull troops back, just doing it on a whim could be dangerous.
Exactly. I spent 13 years throughout my career in the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is an institution of planning and orderliness. And deploying troops and withdrawing them is not, they are not trivial undertakings. And there are all kinds of implications here when you would withdraw, particularly doing it as we appear to be doing in Syria so precipitously. And there are all kinds of unintended consequences that are going to occur here, and this plays havoc in the Pentagon. And the other thing, I think, of course, is they're all kind of on pins and needles over there, wondering, well, what's next? Mm-hmm. What's the next tweet we're going to get about either deploying or withdrawing with not a lot of notice?
As we look at all of this play out, too, it's hard to forget what we've heard from the president in the past, specifically in terms of his own knowledge about how things work and what's happening. I just want to play a little bit of that sound for you.
I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me.
Do you still feel like you know more about ISIS than the generals?
Well, they don't know much because they're not winning. That I can tell you.
When you hear those comments played for you again, what comes to mind?
Well, just appalling arrogance and his portraying himself as a stable genius and all that sort of thing. These things are really complicated, and he would do well to listen to his advisors. And I would point out, by the way, that ISIS is not defeated, not in Syria. And by the way, it's a good thing to remember that ISIS is other places besides Syria, like Afghanistan, where they have a pretty prominent presence there as well. And so I don't think he knows more than the generals do.
There is a lot on the president's plate at this moment, as we know. But if we take a look at who is in place to help him and to help with the everyday job of running the government, it is striking as we look at how many positions have not only had a number of turnovers, but also positions that remain unfilled and what folks coming into those positions will have to deal with. This is an extensive list, and we're 2 years in. Is this something that you feel is in any way starting to take shape? I mean, there are normal moves within an administration, but to look at this point 2 years in, it makes you wonder what comes in the next 2 years.
Yes, exactly. You know, we may look back in 2019 longing for the relative calm of 2018, because I think there's going to be a lot more of this. I do think that Jim Mattis's resignation and the manner in which he did it was a really significant milestone, because I think it's going to cause a lot of other people to do some hard thinking about their own position in the government and whether they can continue to serve. And I think it's also going to be difficult to find others who are qualified, who can be confirmed, to come to the government and serve.
Do you think, to that point, do you think people will start to become more vocal? I mean, to this point, yes, some people who have left a little bit, of course, what we heard from Rex Tillerson last week. But otherwise, even when we're just looking at lawmakers, in terms of Republicans, it's folks who are retiring who were the most vocal and who seem to be unafraid of calling out the president when they believe that something was a bad idea. So do you think that that will change, too, among lawmakers?
Well, it could. I mean, I think the response by many Republicans to Jim Mattis's resignation is perhaps indicative of perhaps newfound boldness to speak up. And I hope, by the way, that Jim doesn't dance quietly off stage, that he will continue to be an influential voice even as he leaves the department.
A lot of folks anxious to hear from him directly beyond that letter, understandably. Director Clapper, always good to see you. Thank you. Happy holidays.
And the same, Erica.
Appreciate it.